This is the Ielts listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1. Part 1.
You will hear a woman and a man talking about their work at a library. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Phillips, the head librarian. You're the new library assistant, aren't you?
Yes, I'm Robert Haskell, but please call me Bob.
All right, Bob. Let me take a few minutes to explain how the library works and what your duties will be. First, the library opens at 8:30 in the morning, so naturally we expect you to be here and ready to work by then.
Of course.
And you can go home at 4:30 when the library closes. Now, let me explain where everything's kept.
It looks like here on the ground floor is where the reference books are.
Yes, that's right. Up on the second floor is where the adult collection is, both fiction and non-fiction.
And the children's books are there too, aren't they? I thought I saw them in the room by the stairway.
No, those are magazines and newspapers for adults. Children's books are up one more flight on the 3rd floor. We'll take a look at them later. Let me show you how we organize our work. Do you see that brown book cart over there?
The one by the door?
Yes, that one. Those books have been checked in and need to go back on the shelves.
Okay, so the brown book cart has books to reshelve. What about this black cart by the desk?
Those books have torn pages or damaged covers. They're all books that need to be repaired.
Okay, I know how to do a lot of that. I'm pretty good at mending torn pages and covers.
That's great, because we really need help with that.
And that white cart in the corner, what are those books for?
Those are old books that we've taken off the shelves to make room for new ones. We sell them as used books to raise money for the library.
So they're all ready to sell?
Yes, that's right. So now you know what to do with the books in the carts. Let's talk about our activities schedule.
Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
I understand this library has a number of interesting activities every week.
Yes, our activities are quite popular. The most popular one is story time for the children.
Do a lot of children show up for that?
Yes, a good many. It takes place in the children's room on Thursday mornings at 11.
Isn't there a family movie night too?
Yes, but it's not at night anymore. We used to have family movies on Fridays when the library is open until 9, but now we have a different activity at that time, so we had to switch family movies to the weekend, Saturday afternoon.
How much do you charge for the movies?
They're all free. The movie always starts at 2:30 in the reference room, but you don't have to worry about that since you don't work on weekends.
And what takes place on Friday evenings?
We've just started a weekly lecture series. We have a different speaker every week, and the lectures cover all different kinds of topics.
That sounds like something I'd be interested in attending.
Good, because we'll need your help with that. You'll be working Friday evenings, and one of your duties will be to set up the meeting room on the first floor for the lecture.
What time will you need that done?
Let's say by 6:15. The lecture starts at 6:30, and the room needs to be ready well ahead of time. A lot of people arrive early.
Maybe I should have the room ready by 6?
That wouldn't be a bad idea. Okay, why don't I take you upstairs and show you the rest of the collection?
That is the end of part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to part 1. Part 2.
You will hear the leader of a college camping club talking to members about a cycling holiday that they are going to have together. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16 on page 4. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Right, now let me bring you up to date with arrangements for our cycling tour next month. First of all, there's the question of tents. As you know, the original idea was that I'd arranged to borrow some tents that belong to the college, but it turns out that the mountaineering club will be using them at the same time, so I'm afraid you'll have to bring your own. So could you let me know whether you'll be using a single tent or sharing, please? I'll need to know how many tents there'll be for when I make the reservation at the various campsites. Last time, some of you said you'd like to hire bikes and pick them up when we arrive rather than taking your own with you. Well, I've inquired about bike hire in Westbury, the town where we'll be arriving, and unfortunately there aren't any shops that hire them out, so I'm afraid it means taking your own. I'll book them on the train when I book the train tickets, which reminds me I'll need to know the final number of people going so I can get a group discount on the train fare. Something else that'll need to be booked is tickets for the football match we discussed last time. I've inquired about availability and there are only a few seats left, so anyone who wants to go will need to get tickets very soon, ideally today or tomorrow. At our next meeting, I'll be able to give you all individual packs with the final programme and something about the area we'll be cycling through and places we'll be visiting. I'm afraid I haven't had time to do that yet.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20 on page 5. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
Now I'll tell you briefly about some of the attractions in the places we'll be staying at. As I said, we'll be taking the train to Westbury, which has one or two very good restaurants. One thing that's definitely worth visiting there is the site where the original town was constructed nearly 1,000 years ago. There's not much of the original buildings left, but there's still plenty to see. The site is being excavated and you'll be able to help out if you want to. Our next overnight stop will be in the village of Cluny. There are several old barns here that have been converted into a museum showing the importance of sheep in the area over the centuries. The wool used to be sold for cloth and it made the district quite rich. There are plenty of photographs showing how agricultural workers used to live too. From there, we'll go on to Pennerley. Pennerley is famous for its Museum of Village Life, but that's being refurbished at the moment and isn't likely to reopen by the time we go there. But there's an open-air farmers market every day selling fruits, vegetables, cheese and meat, all grown or processed within a few miles of the town and sold by the farmers themselves. It's definitely worth a visit. In Farlow, which is one of the oldest towns in the area, there's a museum that shows how horses used to be the most common way of travelling around and how they were gradually replaced by steam trains and later, of course, diesel and electric trains, buses, cars and bicycles. Right, now I'll pass round this sheet of paper.
That is the end of part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 2. Part 3.
You will hear two students talking about a class assignment about wild bird rescue and rehabilitation. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. As you listen to the first part of the conversation, answer questions 21 to 25.
Okay, let's go over the requirements and see what we have left to do.
Let's see. We have to give the professor a written summary of the information we've gathered on our topic, wild bird rescue and rehabilitation.
The other written thing we have to turn in is a case study of the rehabilitation of one bird. We have the information on that already.
Right. All we have to do is write it up. What about charts and graphs? Do we need to include something like that?
I don't think so. They aren't really relevant, but we do have to turn in a list of the resources we used.
Naturally. What about videos? I heard some of the other students were doing that.
Well, I guess that must be optional, because I don't see it on the requirements list. Okay, we should start planning our class presentation, since that counts for half the grade.
We've looked at lots of sources of information, but I think our best source was the interviews we did with the wildlife rehabilitators.
Agreed. That and the journal articles. I think we have enough information from those two sources for the presentation anyhow. The books we looked at weren't all that helpful.
I wonder if we should try to bring in some live birds for the presentation.
That would be too difficult, don't you think? But we have lots of photos of rehabilitated birds. We can show those.
Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Right. OK, I think we should start by talking about how to rescue a bird. Probably first we should help people understand which birds need rescuing.
Yeah, that's really important. Because a lot of times people see a baby bird that's all alone, or they find a bird sitting on the ground and they think it needs to be rescued.
And usually, those are just baby birds learning to fly. So we should emphasize that people should only attempt to rescue a bird that's clearly injured.
For certain kinds of birds, the rescuer needs to wear protective gloves because some of those birds have sharp claws and can tear your shirt, or worse, injure your face or some other part of your body.
Yes, that's an important point. OK, next, let's tell people to put the injured bird in a box with good air circulation. We should let them know that a cage isn't necessary, and a bag, especially a plastic one, could hurt the bird more.
Another thing we need to say is that the best way to help the bird stay calm is not by petting it or talking to it, but by leaving it completely alone. Then people should take the bird to the bird rescue center as soon as possible.
Right, and we should also point out that when they're driving the bird to the rescue center, it's better not to play music on the radio or talk loudly, because those things just stress the bird.
Yes, it's better just to speak quietly while you have the bird in the car. Okay, we've got that part covered. Next we should talk about what happens at the rescue center.
That is the end of part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 3. Part 4.
You will hear a university professor giving a lecture on the influence of children on the adult diet. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40 on pages 7 and 8. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Today we continue with our series of lectures on diet and society in the 21st century. We are all aware of the obesity epidemic facing our society. The reasons for this are well documented and are mainly due to poor eating habits coupled with too little exercise. In fact, a National Health and Nutrition Survey here in the U.S. concluded that the average total food intake increased considerably between the years 1971 and 2000. This appears to be a general trend across most age groups. In fact, apart from the over 60s, all areas of American society are consistently above the dietary guidelines for caloric intake and saturated fat. However, total fat consumption is highest for teenagers, and there is a clear correlation with fast food consumption. Among the wide range of factors influencing an individual's dietary choices, one of the strongest influences is the home. It will come as no surprise that within a family, the fat intakes of husbands and wives and parents and children who cohabit are remarkably similar. Many people assume that this relationship indicates the influence of parents on their children, but we wanted to ask if children influence poor diets in adults. This hypothesis had not been tested in a national sample until now. In our study, we focused only on adults, and we set our lower age limit at 17 and the upper one at 65. The key variable was the presence or absence of children, so we identified only those adults whose children were under 17. Other variables included the age of the adult, level of education they had reached, their ethnic background, their income, and foreign-born status. To obtain our data, first we conducted interviews in the respondents' own homes, and all in all we interviewed 6,600 adults aged over 17. Then we invited them to mobile examination centers where surveys were conducted. From this information, we were able to focus not only on the total fat intake, but also on the person's total caloric consumption. Our results show that the presence of children led to significantly higher levels of both fat consumption and saturated fat in adults. We found on average that adults with children in the home ate 4.9 grams per day of fat more than adults without children. This result is consistent irrespective of race, gender, or age. The foods more commonly were convenience items high in fat or sugar, including pizza, salty snacks, and ice cream. Interestingly, there is a significantly higher percentage of adults in this group who drink milk. There are many explanations for this increased fat intake. Hectic schedules where parents try to balance work, family, and leisure put time at a premium. Another issue is children's preference for fatty foods or foods with a high sugar content. Fast foods and ready-to-eat foods are convenient choices. It is inconvenient to prepare different meals for both the children and the parents, so it is likely that adults consume the same as their children. Of course, there were limitations to our study. One of these is that we did not take into account the number of minors in each household, which could have an effect on the adult who feeds the children. In addition, this study does not take into account the relationship of the adult to the minor. We could also postulate that the older a child gets, the more independent he or she becomes, and so the influence a child has on an adult may lessen depending on the age of the child. In terms of recommendations as a result of this study, we would like to see more research conducted to overcome the limitations outlined earlier. We also feel there is a need for even further research into the influence that friends can have on our fat intake, given the clear link we've established between family members.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4. That is the end of the listening test. In the Ielts test, you would now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet.